Bankrupt farmer abandoned by wife with 5 kids. 15 years later, she returns and is shocked. Robert Miller wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his calloused hand as he watched the dark clouds on the horizon. The approaching rain wouldn't be enough to save his crops. Devastated by the relentless drought that had plagued Pennsylvania for months, the debts piled up as quickly as his hopes dwindled. It was on a stormy night that Melissa left. Robert found only a cold letter on the kitchen table, a few hastily packed clothes, and the deafening silence that now echoed through the house. He barely had time to process the betrayal when the cries of Ethan, their youngest at just 1 year old, snapped him back to the brutal reality. He was alone with 5 small children, a farm on the brink of ruin, and a shattered heart. Emily, the eldest at 7, appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Dad, where's Mom?" she asked, still unaware that this innocent question would be the first of many he wouldn't know how to answer in the years to come. She had to go away, sweetheart," Robert replied, hiding the letter in the pocket of his worn shirt, feeling the paper burn against his chest like hot iron. That night, as the children slept, Robert sat on the porch of their modest home, staring into the darkness stretching across the parched fields of his property. Melissa's letter was clear and merciless. "I wasn't made for this life, Robert. I can't keep pretending I'm happy in the middle of nowhere, watching you fight the inevitable. This farm is bankrupt, and I won't go down with it." The seek to me. First light of dawn brought the harsh reality of the next day. 5 mouths to feed, a mortgage overdue, and the bank already threatening eviction. The drought had destroyed nearly all his coffee crop, the cows were too thin to give enough milk, and the little money left would barely last a few weeks. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor from the next property, was the first to arrive after noticing Melissa's absence. "Where's that girl?" she asked bluntly, while helping feed baby Ethan. "She's gone," Robert replied flatly, trying to prepare a simple breakfast for the children. "She left 5 children?" The outrage in the old woman's voice made Robert feel a mix of shame and anger. "And now, what are you going to do?" "I don't know, Mrs. Thompson, but I won't abandon my kids or this land." The following days were a test of endurance. Robert woke before sunrise, tended to the remaining animals, salvaged what he could from the crops, made simple meals for the children, washed clothes, told stories to put the little ones to sleep, and only then allowed himself to collapse, exhausted on the worn-out living room couch, because the bedroom still carried Melissa's scent. Emily, mature beyond her years, started taking on responsibilities. She cared for her younger siblings, Jake at 5, the twins Olivia and Nathan at 3, and baby Ethan. Meanwhile, Robert looked for extra work on neighboring farms to make ends meet. "Why'd you bring the kids, Mr. Miller?" the foreman at Oak Ridge Farm asked when he saw the man arrive with all 5 children for the harvest work. "I've got no one to leave them with," he answered simply, placing Ethan in Emily's arms as she sat under a tree with the others. "Work is work, this ain't a daycare," the foreman retorted, denying him the much-needed job. When he returned home that day, a letter from the bank awaited him. "Dear Mr. Miller, we inform you that your property will enter foreclosure proceedings if the minimum amount of $15,000 is not paid within 3 months. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out." Now continuing. Desperation is a feeling that transforms when there's no luxury of time to fully experience it. For Robert, it turned into stubborn determination. The morning after the bank's ultimatum, he gathered his children around the kitchen table and looked at each little face that depended on him. "We'll have to make some changes around here," he announced, his voice firm but gentle. "Emily, you'll need to help me more with your siblings. Jake, you're a big boy now and need to learn some farm chores." "But Dad, what about school?" asked Emily, ever responsible. "You'll keep studying, I promise. We just need to organize ourselves better." The first tough decision was selling the only tractor left on the property, an inheritance from Robert's father. The money would ensure food for a few months and cover the most urgent bills, but it meant all the farm work would have to be done, by hand from then on. A week after Melissa left, the first big storm hit. The roof of the house, already weakened by lack of maintenance, gave way in several spots, flooding rooms and soaking furniture. That night, everyone slept huddled together in the small living room, the only dry space left. "Dad, will Mommy come back when she hears the roof broke?" asked Nathan, the more sensitive of the twins, his blue eyes just like his mother's. "I don't know, son," Robert replied, his throat tight. "How do you explain abandonment to a 3-year-old? It was Mrs. Thompson who showed up the next morning with her nephew Frank, who knew a thing or two about construction." "I can't let these children sleep under leaks," the older woman declared, brushing off Robert's protests about not having money to pay. "Frank will fix the basics now, and you'll pay me back when you can." The neighbor's kindness was unexpected. Melissa had never gotten along with Mrs. Thompson, calling her nosy and old-fashioned. Now, Robert realized he'd misjudged her. With the roof partially repaired, the next challenge arrived. The children needed to return to school, but the 8-mile distance to the small town of Riverdale made it impossible for Robert to take and pick up the older kids every day while working the land and caring for the little ones. "I'll figure something out," he promised Emily, who cried silently at the thought of not being able to study anymore. The something came in the form of improvisation. Robert turned a corner of the living room into a makeshift homeschool. He dug out old books stored in the attic, some from when he himself had been a student, and set up a schedule to teach the basics. "It's not ideal, but it's temporary," he explained to the social worker, who showed up after anonymous reports of children missing school. "Mr. Miller, I understand your situation, but the law requires children to attend a formal school," the woman said, glancing around and jotting concerning notes on her clipboard. "Give me a little time. I'm trying to arrange a ride with old Jack, who delivers milk to town every day. You have 1 month, Mr. Miller. After that, I'll have to report this to Child Services." The veiled threat of losing custody weighed like lead on Robert's already burdened shoulders. The nights grew longer. After putting the children to bed, Robert spent hours by lantern light, studying old farming books, searching for ways to revive the parched land and diversify their crops without big investments. It was on one of those nights that he found, forgotten on the shelf, a notebook of Melissa's grandmother's recipes. "Sweet preserves and jams from Hope Valley Farm," read the yellowed cover. Inside were dozens of detailed recipes for jams, preserves, pickles and chutneys that used practically everything produced on the farm, even parts that would normally be discarded. An idea began to take shape that night. With the few fruit trees that had survived the drought and the vegetables from the small garden he kept near the house, he could make preserves to sell at the town market. It wouldn't bring in much money, but it would be a start. The next morning, with renewed determination, Robert woke his children to the smell of cornbread, a recipe he'd found in the notebook and made with the few ingredients he had. "Kids, we're going on a little trip today," he announced during breakfast. "Are we going to town?" Jake asked excitedly. "Yes, we're heading to the market. I need to check a few things there. And you're going to help me." The Riverdale market took place on Sundays in the town square. It was small but brought together local farmers and artisans. Robert carefully observed how products were displayed, their prices and what people bought. He especially noticed a stall with homemade jams and preserves that always had a line. "How much for one of these jams, ma'am?" he asked the vendor, a sturdy woman with graying hair. $15 for the small jar, $25 for the large. They're family recipes, all natural," she replied proudly. On the way back home, on the bus that ran only twice a week through the area, Robert did the math in his head. If he could make 10 jars of jam a week, he could earn enough to supplement the children's meals, and maybe in a few months start paying off part of the bank debt. "Dad, what are we doing?" Emily asked, always attuned to changes in her father's behavior. "We're starting over, sweetheart," he replied, squeezing the little girl's hand. "It's going to take a lot of work, but we'll make it." The following days were filled with hard work. With the children's help, Robert picked the ripe fruit from the orchard, guavas, mangoes, and oranges that had survived the drought. Following the notebook's recipes, he made the first batches of jam in improvised pots over the wood stove. The jars were carefully washed and sterilized, and simple labels were handwritten by Emily, who had neat handwriting and loved to draw. The next Sunday, with just 8 jars of jam carefully packed in a wooden crate, Robert returned to the market. He didn't have money to rent a stall, so he simply set the crate on a clean cloth in a corner of the square. "What's this, young man?" an elderly woman asked, intrigued by the simple display. "Homemade jams from Hope Valley Farm, ma'am." "Old family recipes," Robert replied, using the farm's original name long since forgotten. The woman bought a jar of orange ginger jam, an unusual combination he'd found in the notebook. By noon, all the jars had been sold. "Will you be back?" "Next Sunday?" asked Teresa, who owned a small grocery store in town. "If you bring more of that orange ginger jam, I'll buy all of it." The trip home that day felt different. There was hope in Robert's eyes, something the children hadn't seen since their mother left. "Kids, we need more fruit," he announced when they arrived. "Tomorrow we'll see what we can find on the trees." The following weeks established a new routine. In the mornings, Robert tended to the land and the few remaining animals. In the afternoons, with the children's help, he focused on making jams and preserves. Emily and Jake learned to pick the ripest fruit. The twins helped by washing and drying the jars. Even little Ethan contributed in his own way, sitting on the kitchen floor, playing with pots and wooden spoons. Production gradually increased, as did sales. Teresa from the grocery store became a regular customer, buying larger quantities to resell in her shop. With the money from the first few weeks, Robert managed to buy school supplies for the children and arranged transportation with old Jack to take them to school in town. "The kids are well behaved, Mr. Miller. They're no trouble," the milkman remarked after the first week of driving them. "Only little Emily worries about you being left alone with the baby." "She grew up too fast," Robert replied with a sigh. "She looks after her brothers as if she were their mother." It was at school that the first problems arose. Jake, usually calm, got into a fight with a classmate who made comments about his mother abandoning the family. He came home with a split lip and eyes full of held-back tears. He said Mum left because she didn't like us. The boy recounted that evening as Robert cleaned the wound. "Said we're so poor we don't even have a mother." "Jake, look at me." Robert held his son's face between his calloused hands. "What happened with your mother wasn't your fault. Never ever think that. Some people can't handle hardship. They run away. That says nothing about you, but a lot about them. But Dad, will she come back one day?" The question Robert dreaded, the same one that echoed in his own mind on lonely nights. "I don't know, son, but what I do know is that we have each other. We have our family, even if it's different than before, and we're moving forward. Aren't we?" He tried to smile despite the heaviness in his heart. That night, after the children fell asleep, Robert allowed himself to cry silently on the porch, not just for Melissa's absence, but for the pain he saw in his children's eyes, especially when other kids mentioned their mothers. The jam and preserves business grew slowly. After 2 months, Robert had regular customers at the market and supplied 3 shops in town. Money was still tight, but they could eat better, and the children no longer had to wear patched-up clothes thanks to the second-hand items he bought at the church charity bazaar. It was during one of the market days that Robert met Sarah Johnson, the new teacher at the public school. She stopped in front of his stand, now a simple table covered with an embroidered cloth Mrs. Thompson had given him. "So, you're Jake and Emily's father," she remarked, examining his products. "They talk about you a lot at school." "I hope it's good things," Robert replied, trying to keep his composure in front of the kind-eyed young teacher. "Very good. Emily's always helping the younger kids. She has a strong motherly instinct." She paused, realizing what she'd just said. "I'm sorry, It's fine," Robert interrupted. "It's the truth. She's taken on responsibilities she shouldn't have at her age. I try to ease that, but I don't always succeed. I understand, and Jake's doing better. After that incident, we talked a lot about emotional control." Sarah picked up a jar of pickled gherkins. "These look delicious." "My grandmother's. Her recipe," Robert said, feeling strangely at ease talking to her. "Took me 3 tries to get it right. Worth the persistence, isn't it?" She smiled, paying for the pickles. Like everything in life. That brief encounter brought a little lightness to Robert's day. He'd forgotten what it was like to talk to an adult without discussing problems or business. Sarah seemed genuinely interested in his children, and that warmed his heart as a worried father. Yet the looming bank deadline weighed heavier each day. Just over 2 weeks remained before the 3-month ultimatum expired, and the money saved was still far from the needed amount. Robert worked tirelessly, increasing the production of preserves, taking odd jobs at neighboring properties and saving every possible penny. It was during one of these nights of hard work that little Ethan, now almost a year and a half old, fell ill with a high fever. The child cried non-stop, his little face red and hot to the touch. "I need to take him to the doctor," Robert said to Emily, who was trying to soothe her brother with cool compresses. "But Dad, how will we get to town at this hour? The last bus already passed?" the girl asked, worried. "I'll ask Mrs. Thompson for help. Maybe she knows someone with a car." The elderly neighbor didn't hesitate to assist. Her nephew Frank had an old pickup truck and offered to take them to the small hospital in Riverdale. "Pneumonia," the doctor diagnosed after examining Ethan. "We need to admit him for IV medication." "For how long, doctor?" asked Robert, mentally calculating how he'd rearrange his routine with a hospitalized child. "At least 3 days, depending on how he responds to treatment. Can you stay with him? Children this age need their parents close." "I have 4 other kids, doctor. They're home with a neighbor," he explained, feeling torn. "But I'll figure something out. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, the solution came again from Mrs. Thompson, who offered to watch the other children while Robert stayed at the hospital with Ethan. But that meant 3 days without making preserves, without working the fields, without earning the much-needed money for the bank payment. During the long nights at the hospital, sitting beside the crib where Ethan slept fitfully, Robert faced the real possibility of losing the farm. Maybe, he thought bitterly, Melissa had been right. Maybe it was time to accept defeat, sell what was left and move to the city, where he could find a steady job and give his children better opportunities. When Ethan was discharged, stronger and rosy-cheeked, Robert returned to the farm with the heavy heart of someone making a painful decision. "Kids, we need to talk." He gathered them in the living room after a simple dinner. "Is Ethan better, Dad?" asked Olivia, who always showed special affection for the youngest. "Yes, sweetheart. He's fine now," he smiled briefly. "But we need to talk about our situation. The farm, we might have to move to the city. Leave our home set." Jake's eyes widened. "I don't want to go," Nathan protested. "Dad, we can't lose Grandpa's farm." Emily, with the maturity life had forced upon her, put into words what they all felt. "I know, honey. I don't want to either. This land has been in our family for 3 generations, but sometimes we have to make hard choices." "What about our jam business?" Jake asked. "Teacher Sarah said we're entrepreneurs." The mention of the family business and the teacher made Robert pause. The preserves were selling well, building a reputation. Giving up now would mean quitting just as they were starting to see results. "Let's try a little longer," he decided, spurred by his children's hopeful gazes. "We have 2 weeks until the bank's deadline. We'll work twice as hard." The following days were filled with intense labor. Word that Ethan had been sick and the family was struggling spread through the small community. To Robert's surprise, several neighbors showed up offering help. Old Jack brought fruit from his orchard. Teacher Sarah organized the students to help with the vegetable harvest. Even the town priest came with some volunteers to repair the damaged roof. "Why are you doing this?" Robert asked Father Michael as they watched the work on the roof. "That's what community is, Robert. In hard times, we support each other. You're not the first to face difficulties, nor will you be the last. Today we help you. Tomorrow you'll help someone else." The unexpected solidarity brought new energy. With more hands to help, the production of preserves increased significantly. Sarah suggested creating more elaborate labels, featuring the farm's history and traditional recipes. One of her students, the daughter of a printer, designed a simple but beautiful logo for the products. "Hope Valley Flavors," Robert read, moved as he saw the first printed labels. "It's perfect." At the next market, the stall for Hope Valley Farms products was completely transformed. A larger table, new linens, and the products arranged attractively, with small cards explaining the story behind each recipe. "What happened here?" asked Teresa, the grocery store owner, impressed by the change. "What happened is I discovered I'm not alone," Robert replied simply. Sales that day exceeded all expectations. By late afternoon, only 3 jars remained of a new recipe Robert had tried, jabuticaba jelly with cinnamon. "I'm impressed," Sarah remarked, stopping by the market at the end of the day. "You're building a brand." "It's still far from what we need," Robert admitted, "but for the first time I see a path forward." The path, however, was still steep. Even with increased sales, the money raised wouldn't be enough to cover the amount demanded by the bank. Robert considered asking for a loan, but who would lend to a debt-ridden farmer, a widower, as everyone believed, with 5 young children? With just 5 days left before the deadline, Robert decided to go in person to the bank in Riverdale to negotiate an extension. He wore his only good shirt, inherited from his father, and asked Mrs. Thompson to watch the children. "I'll pray for you, my boy," the elderly woman said, squeezing his wrinkled hand. "Take these sweets for the manager, too. A full stomach softens even the hardest heart." At the bank, Robert waited nervously until he was called into the manager's office. A middle-aged man with a stern expression. "Mr. Miller, the minimum amount to avoid foreclosure is $15,000. Do you have that sum?" he asked directly after formal greetings. "No, Mr. Anderson. I have about 1/3 of that," Robert answered honestly. "But I came to propose an agreement. I need 6 more months. My business is growing. I'm gaining new customers." "Business?" the manager interrupted, intrigued. "I thought you were just a farmer." "Well, I was. But I've started making handmade preserves and jams. They're selling well in town. Here, I brought some for you to try." Robert opened the small basket Mrs. Thompson had prepared. The manager looked skeptical, but accepted a small jar of pumpkin and coconut jam. After tasting it, his eyebrows rose in surprise. "This is extraordinary, Mr. Miller. My wife loves homemade sweets," he remarked, trying a second variety. "But understand, I can't simply extend deadlines based on jams, no matter how good they are. What if I increase the monthly payment? I can commit to paying double the regular installments, but I need time to stabilize the business." Robert spoke with conviction, surprising even himself. "Let me see what I can do." The manager made some notes. "There's a bank program for small farmers who diversify their production. Perhaps you qualify." Robert left the bank with a mix of hope and apprehension. There were no guarantees, but at least the manager was willing to present his case to the credit committee. When he returned to the farm, a surprise awaited him. Sarah had brought her students for a hands-on lesson about artisanal food production. "I hope you don't mind," she said as the children helped Emily sort the fruit. "I thought it would be educational for them, and a help to you." "It's perfect," Robert replied, moved by the scene. His own children were mingling with their classmates, teaching what they knew about the process. That afternoon was special. The children learned about food preservation, sustainability, and rural entrepreneurship. Robert, in turn, realized his small business could have a bigger impact than he'd ever imagined. "You should teach classes about this," Sarah suggested, while the children snacked after their work. "Many families in the area could benefit from this knowledge." "Me, a teacher?" Robert laughed at the idea. "I barely finished middle school." "Knowledge doesn't just come from school, Robert," she smiled, her eyes reflecting the afternoon. "Son, you have practical wisdom. That's what many people need to learn." Sarah's suggestion planted a seed. While the bank decided his fate, Robert began considering possibilities he'd never thought of before. What if he turned part of the farm into a learning center for artisanal production? His family's old recipes could be preserved and shared. 3 days later, Teresa, the owner of the grocery store, paid him a visit. "Robert, I need to talk to you about business," she announced, sitting at the kitchen table. "I have a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" he asked, pouring her a simple cup of coffee. "I want to buy your products, all of them, and not just for my store. I have a cousin in Pittsburgh who owns a chain of delicatessens. He visited me last week and took some of your products to try." Robert's heart raced. This was a bigger opportunity than he'd ever imagined. "And he liked them?" "He liked them so much he wants an initial order of 300 jars. Teresa smiled at Robert's shocked expression. "Different flavors, monthly deliveries. What do you say?" 300? He repeated, stunned. Teresa, right now I produce about 50 a week, and that's with help. Then you'll need to expand, hire people, organize production, she said enthusiastically. My cousin is willing to advance part of the payment so you can set it up. Their conversations stretched for hours. They discussed logistics, pricing, and investment needs. By the end, Robert had a rough business plan and, more importantly, a real chance to save the farm. The next morning, he rushed to the bank with the detailed proposal. The manager, Mr. Anderson, listened carefully and seemed genuinely impressed. This changes the situation considerably, Mr. Miller, he remarked, reviewing the numbers. With this contract, we can reconsider the loan and adjust the mortgage terms. Hope grew. With the bank more receptive and the prospect of a stable contract, Robert allowed himself to dream again. Maybe he could not only keep the farm but transform it into something new and thriving. News of the deli contract spread quickly through the community. Several people showed up offering to work, wanting to be part of the emerging business. Robert, who had always seen himself as alone since Melissa left, suddenly found himself at the center of a small support network. But not all was good news. At school, Jake was still struggling to adjust. Teacher Sarah requested a meeting to discuss the situation. He has outbursts of anger, she explained, concerned, when he's frustrated or when he feels he's being treated unfairly. It's my fault, Robert sighed. I've been so busy trying to save the farm that I didn't realize how it's affecting him. Don't blame yourself, Robert. You're doing the best you can under very difficult circumstances. Sarah placed her hand over his, a simple gesture of comfort that made his heart skip. But Jake needs a way to express what he's feeling. What do you suggest? He draws. Very well. I've noticed that during art classes when he's the calmest, maybe drawing could be an outlet for him. Sarah's suggestion reminded Robert of the abandoned shed at the back of the property. It was where his father used to do small woodworking projects, a hobby he never had time to pursue. The tools were still there, covered in dust. The following weekend, Robert took Jake to the shed. What are we doing here, Dad? The boy asked, curious. Your grandfather worked with wood. He made incredible things, Robert explained, opening the door that hadn't been used in years. I thought you might like to learn. Jake's eyes lit up when he saw the old tools, the pieces of wood waiting to take shape. Can we make anything? Anything you can imagine, son. Robert smiled, feeling he'd found a way to reconnect with his son. In the weeks that followed, as the preserves business took shape with the community's help, Robert set aside Friday evenings to work with Jake in the shed. They started with simple projects, a toolbox, picture frames, small shelves. Over time, the boy showed real talent for woodworking. He has his grandfather's hands, Robert remarked to Mrs. Thompson, showing her a wooden rabbit Jake had carved for his little brother. And his temperament too, the elderly woman observed wisely. Creative but impatient, he needs to learn to channel that energy. Woodworking became not just a therapeutic activity for Jake, but also a new opportunity for the family business. The wooden preserve holders they created together became a unique feature of Hope Valley Farms products, adding value and personality. With production increasing, the farmhouse kitchen became too small. Robert decided to renovate part of the old barn, turning it into a commercial kitchen that met health regulations. The initial investment came from the advance payment from the delicatessens, supplemented by a small loan the bank finally approved. It's a good start, Sarah said, visiting the newly renovated space. She had become a frequent presence at the farm, initially out of interest in the educational project, but increasingly for personal reasons neither had yet put into words. But you'll need proper equipment. I'm working on it, Robert replied, one step at a time. The business expansion meant more responsibilities, more decisions to make. Robert, used to working alone, now had to learn to delegate, to trust others. Emily, just 8 years old, showed impressive organizational skills, keeping meticulous records of recipes, needed ingredients, and sales. She's going to be a great businesswoman one day, remarked Frank, Mrs. Thompson's nephew, who helped with the farm renovations. She's already bossing everyone around, just like her mother, Robert let slip, bringing a momentary silence. He rarely mentioned Melissa. Dad, I found this in the attic, Nathan interrupted, arriving with a dusty box. "Are these pictures of Mom?" The box contained old family photographs, including many of Melissa before and just after their marriage. In one of them, the couple smiled in front of the newly acquired farm, full of dreams for the future. "It was a different time," murmured Robert, feeling a pang of nostalgia, not for the woman who had left him, but for the hopeful young woman she had once been. "She was beautiful," commented Olivia, examining a photo of her mother, pregnant with the twins. "Yes, she was," Robert agreed. After more than 6 months, he could finally speak of Melissa without corrosive anger, only a resigned sadness for what might have been. The photographs brought up questions Robert knew he would eventually have to answer. The children, especially the older ones, were beginning to understand that their mother's disappearance wasn't temporary, as he had initially suggested. "She's not coming back, is she, Dad?" asked Emily that night after the younger ones had gone to sleep. "I don't know, sweetheart," he answered honestly. "Your mother had dreams different from mine. Life on the farm was never what she truly wanted. Didn't she love us enough to stay?" The question was simple, direct, and cut Robert's heart like a knife. "Love is complicated, Emily," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes people love but don't know how to show it the way they should, or they love but carry wounds inside they don't know how to heal. How do you do it, Dad? Taking care of all of us alone?" "I'm not alone. I have you." He smiled, hugging his daughter. "And now we have friends, people who care. We're building something new here." As the first year without Melissa neared its end, the transformation of Hope Valley Farm was remarkable. The production of preserves and jams had become a viable business. The contract with the delis was renewed and expanded. The mortgage was renegotiated on more favorable terms. The children had adjusted to school, with Jake finding balance through woodworking and Emily thriving academically. On the exact day marking 1 year since Melissa's departure, Robert allowed himself a moment of reflection. He sat on the porch at dusk, watching the children play in the yard. Ethan, now 2 years old, chased a chicken, laughing heartily. The twins built something with rocks and twigs. Jake worked on a new wood project, focused and serene. Emily read a book under the shade of the oak tree. "They're happy children," remarked Sarah, who had come to bring some books for Emily. "You did that, Robert." "We all did, the whole community," he replied, shifting to make room for her on the porch bench. "A year ago, I thought everything was over. And now I know we were just beginning." He smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't known in a long time. Life moved forward at Hope Valley Farm. The years passed, marked by constant challenges, but also significant achievements. The small artisanal production expanded into a full line of organic products. The reputation of Hope Valley flavors grew beyond regional borders, attracting visitors interested in the story behind the venture. The children grew up, each developing their own personalities and interests. Emily, always responsible and organized, naturally took over the family business's management in her teens. Jake turned his love for woodworking into a line of handmade furniture that complemented the food products. The twins, Olivia and Nathan, though different in temperament, shared a love for the land, gradually taking over the agricultural aspects of the farm. Ethan, the youngest with no memories of his mother, grew up surrounded by love, developing a surprising talent for cooking. Robert watched his children grow with pride and a touch of melancholy, wishing they had known easier times in their childhood. But he also recognized that the hardships had forged in them a rare resilience and compassion. His relationship with Sarah developed slowly, with mutual respect turning into deep friendship and eventually into something more. She never tried to replace Melissa, nor did Robert expect her to. Instead, they built something new based on shared values and love for the children. When Emily turned 17, Robert finally felt ready to make his relationship with Sarah official. The ceremony was simple, held in the farm's backyard, with only their closest loved ones present. The children, now teenagers, actively participated in the preparations, celebrating the happiness of the father who had sacrificed so much for them. Life wasn't perfect, There were arguments, disagreements, and moments of tension, typical of any family. Jake, especially, went through a rebellious phase in early adolescence, questioning authority and testing limits. But the solid foundation built during the hard years allowed them to overcome obstacles together. And then, 15 years after her departure, when no one expected it anymore, Melissa returned. It was an ordinary Sunday at the farmers' market in Riverdale. The Hope Valley Flavors stand had become a permanent fixture, managed by Emily and Ethan, now 16. Robert rarely went to the market, busy with expanding the farm's agricultural operations. "That woman has been staring over here for almost an hour," Ethan remarked to his sister, discreetly pointing to an elegant lady standing across the square. "Probably just another tourist interested in the farm's history," replied Emily, accustomed to the curiosity their family business attracted. "Go talk to her." Ethan approached the woman with his usual friendly smile. "Can I help you, Mom? Would you like to try our products?" The woman, around 50, well-dressed with an air of urban sophistication, seemed nervous. Yes, please," she answered, following him to the stand. "We have jams, preserves, sauces, all organically produced on our farm," Ethan explained, with his usual enthusiasm. "Family recipes." "Family?" the woman repeated, her voice trembling. "Are you Robert Miller's son?" "Yes. I'm Ethan, the youngest," he replied, curious. "Do you know my dad?" Before the woman could answer, Emily approached, drawn by the conversation. "Can I help with anything?" she asked with the professional efficiency that defined her. The woman looked at Emily as if seeing a ghost. "Emily?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "My God, how you've grown!" Emily frowned, confused. Then, slowly, understanding dawned in her eyes. "Mom?" The word came out like a disbelieving question. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting. Out. Now continuing. Ethan looked from one to the other, bewildered. He had no memories of his mother, only stories from his siblings and a few old photographs. "Mom?" he repeated uncertainly, the word unfamiliar on his tongue. Melissa, for it, was her, had tears in her eyes. 15 years had turned the restless young woman into a middle-aged lady with expression lines and streaks of grey in her dark hair. But the same blue eyes that Nathan and Olivia had inherited. "Yes," she finally confirmed, "it's me." The moment was interrupted by other customers approaching the stand. Emily, ever professional even in shock, attended to them automatically, while Ethan remained staring at the woman who was his birth mother, but a complete stranger. "Maybe we should talk somewhere else," Melissa suggested, visibly uncomfortable with the attention they were drawing. "We're working," Emily replied coldly. "If you want to talk, you'll have to wait until we close at 5. "I'll wait," Melissa nodded, resigned. "I'll be at the cafe in the square." As the woman walked away, Ethan turned to his sister. "We need to tell Dad," he said, reaching for his phone. "No," Emily stopped him. "Let's hear what she has to say first. Then we'll decide how to tell him." The next few hours were torture. The siblings worked mechanically, their minds swirling with questions. Why had she come back now? What did she want? Why had she left in the first place? When they finally closed the stand, they found Melissa where she had promised to wait. Sitting, alone at a corner table, she looked small and vulnerable. Nothing like the imposing figure Emily faintly remembered from childhood. "Thank you for coming," Melissa said as they sat down. "I don't even know where to begin." "How about the beginning?" Emily suggested, her voice controlled. "Why did you leave us?" Melissa took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "The simple answer is that I was young, scared, and selfish. The full answer is more complicated." "We have time," Ethan replied, surprising himself with his calm tone. "I had big dreams when I was young," Melissa began. "I wanted to be a singer, to travel, to see the world. Instead, I married your father young and moved to an isolated farm. With each child, I felt further from my dreams." "No one forced you to have 5 children," Emily pointed out, bitterness clear in her voice. No one forced me," Melissa. Agreed. They were choices I made, choices I didn't know how to honor. After Ethan was born, I fell into a deep depression. I felt trapped, suffocated. And when the drought came, destroying the crops, drowning us in debt, and it felt like the universe was confirming I'd made a terrible mistake. So you ran away, Ethan concluded. Yes. The simplicity of the confession was unsettling. I went to Los Angeles, then New York City. I pursued the music career I'd always dreamed of. I had some small successes, singing in bars, doing backup vocals on recordings. I even recorded an independent album that sold fairly well. And was that worth abandoning your family? Emily asked, unable to contain years of pent-up pain. No, Melissa's eyes filled with tears. Nothing could make up for that. I realized, too late. When the initial excitement faded, when the novelty of freedom wore off, I started missing you, but by then, it was too late to come back. Why is it too late now? Ethan asked, curious. I don't know if it is, she answered honestly. That's why I'm here. To ask for forgiveness even if I might not deserve it. To get to know you again if you'll let me. Emily fell silent, processing everything she'd heard. Melissa's answers were unsatisfying, but also strangely human. There were no grand justifications, only confessions of weakness and mistakes. How did you know where to find us? She finally asked. I saw an article in a business magazine about successful family businesses, Melissa explained. There was a photo of your stand at the fair with the Hope Valley Flavors brand. I recognized the farm's name. Then I looked further and found a local feature mentioning your story, how you overcame hardships. A very convenient comeback story now that we're doing well, Emily remarked bitterly. I understand your anger. Melissa didn't try to defend herself. You have every right to feel that way. It's not anger, Emily corrected. It's disappointment. For 15 years I imagined this moment. I rehearsed what I'd say, what I'd ask. And now, looking at you, all I can think about is all the nights I spent comforting my younger siblings while they cried for their mother. All the times I had to be the mother when I was still just a child. And you were amazing at that. Melissa reached for her daughter's hand, which was immediately pulled away. Frank, an old acquaintance from the area, told me how you took on responsibilities, how you helped your father keep the family together. I had no choice, Emily replied. Does your father know you're here? Ethan asked, shifting the conversation. No, Melissa shook her head. I wanted to talk to you first. Why? Because I was afraid he'd stop me from seeing you, she confessed. And because you deserve the chance to decide if you want to know me, regardless of what he thinks. The answer surprised the siblings. There was a raw honesty in Melissa's words, a vulnerability they hadn't expected. Where are you staying? Emily asked after a long silence. At Mrs. Wilson's Inn downtown. I plan to stay a few days if you'd like to talk more. We need time to think, Emily decided, standing up. And we need to talk to our siblings and our father. Of course, Melissa nodded, resigned. I'll be here as long as it takes. The ride back to the farm was silent. Ethan and Emily, usually so close, were lost in their own thoughts, trying to process the sudden reappearance of the mother they never expected to see again. What are we going to tell Dad? Ethan asked as they neared home. The truth, Emily answered simply. He deserves to know. Hope Valley Farm, 15 years after Melissa's abandonment, was unrecognizable. The main house had been completely restored, with a new roof, fresh paint, and an expanded porch. The old barn had been converted into a modern production facility. New sheds housed Jake's woodworking shop and the organic product development lab managed by Nathan and Olivia. The fields, once parched by drought, now flourished with diverse crops and modern irrigation systems. When Ethan and Emily arrived, the family was gathered for their traditional Sunday lunch. Robert, now grey-haired but still strong and vigorous, was helping Sarah set the table. Jake, at 20, was showing Nathan a new design for wooden packaging. Olivia was chatting excitedly with her boyfriend, an agronomist she'd met in college. Finally, Sarah exclaimed when she saw them. We were waiting to start. Sorry we're late, Emily said, exchanging a meaningful glance with Ethan. We had an unexpected situation. Problems at the market, Robert asked, always attentive to business. Not exactly. Emily took a deep breath. Dad, after lunch, we need to talk. You, me, and Ethan. It's important. Something in Emily's voice alerted Robert. He knew her too well not to sense when something serious was happening. We can talk now, he decided, concerned. Sarah, can you start without us? The three of them went to the office, Melissa's old bedroom, which Robert had converted years ago. Emily sat on the edge of the desk while Ethan remained standing, restless. What happened? Robert asked directly. Mom showed up at the market today, Ethan said, opting for a straightforward approach. Robert froze, as if the words were a physical blow. His normally expressive face became an impenetrable mask. Melissa? He finally asked, his voice low and controlled. Yes, Emily confirmed. She saw an article about our business and found us. What did she want? The question was almost a whisper. Forgiveness, apparently, Emily replied. She said she wants to know us again. After 15 years, Robert shook his head in disbelief. 15 years without a word, without a phone call, without caring if we were alive or dead. She talked about postpartum depression after Ethan was born, Emily continued, about feeling trapped here, about her dreams of being a singer. And you? Interrupted Robert, looking directly at his children. How do you feel about this? The question caught them off guard. They expected anger, perhaps even a ban on seeing their mother again. Instead, Robert seemed genuinely concerned about their feelings. Confused, admitted Ethan. I don't remember her. It's like meeting a stranger who just happened to give birth to me. I remember, said Emily softly. Not much, but enough. And I've always imagined this moment. But now that it's happened, I don't know what to feel. Robert nodded understandingly. You need to give yourselves time, he advised. This isn't an ordinary situation. And what about you, Dad? Asked Ethan. What will you do? I don't know yet, admitted Robert. I need to think. Where is she staying? At Mrs. Wilson's Inn, replied Emily. She said she'll be here a few days. I'll talk to her, Robert decided after a moment. Alone first, then you can decide if you want to get to know her better. What do we tell the others? Ethan questioned, referring to their siblings. The truth, answered Robert, unknowingly repeating the same word Emily had used earlier. They have the right to know and decide for themselves. Lunch. Passed in an uneasy atmosphere. Robert tried to maintain normalcy, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. At the end of the meal, he gathered everyone in the living room and, with Sarah's comforting presence by his side, told them about Melissa's return. The reactions varied. Jake, who was 6 when his mother left and carried painful memories of abandonment, reacted with immediate anger. After all this time? Now that we don't need her anymore? His voice trembled with restrained emotion. The twins, Nathan and Olivia, fell silent, processing the news in different ways. Nathan, always more introspective, seemed lost in thought. Olivia, more emotional, had tears in her eyes. Does she want to see us, all of us? What? She finally asked. Apparently, yes, Robert replied. But no one is obligated. It's an individual choice. I want to see her, Olivia decided immediately. I have so many questions. I don't, Jake declared firmly. She hasn't existed for me for 15 years, and that's how it can stay. That's fine, son. Robert placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. I respect your decision. And what about you, Sarah? Emily asked, sensitive to her stepmother's delicate position. Sarah, who had entered their lives as a teacher and become a mother figure to them all, smiled gently. My place is by your side, supporting whatever decision you make, she answered sincerely. This doesn't change who we are as a family. Her response eased the tension in the room. Sarah always had a gift for finding the right words in difficult moments. That afternoon, Robert drove into town alone. He needed to face Melissa, to understand her reasons before allowing her back into their children's lives. The pain of abandonment, though long scarred over, was still there, like an old fracture that aches when the weather changes. Mrs. Wilson's Inn was a restored colonial house in the town's historic center. Robert asked the receptionist to inform Melissa of his visit, and waited in the small inner garden, surrounded by colorful begonias that reminded him of the ones Melissa used to grow when they still lived on the farm. When she appeared at the door, the impact was less intense than Robert had imagined. The years had turned the impulsive young woman he'd known into a mature woman, with lines around her eyes and mouth. She was elegant, yes, but the dazzling spark that had once captivated him was gone. "Robert," she said simply, seeming unsure how to greet him. "Melissa," he replied with a brief nod. "Seems you can still surprise us." "The kids talk to you?" It wasn't a question. "Yes, Emily and Ethan told me about your reappearance." They sat on a wooden bench under the shade of a mango tree. The silence between them was heavy with unasked questions and unspoken accusations. "Why now, Melissa?" Robert finally asked, his voice controlled. "Why after 15 years without a word?" "Because I finally found the courage," she replied, looking down at her hands. "And because I realized life is too short to carry regrets." "Regrets?" Robert repeated, a bitter note in his voice. "Is that what you call abandoning 5 children?" "I don't expect you to understand or forgive." Melissa met his gaze. "What I did was unforgivable. But yes, I deeply regret it. Every single day since I left." "Then why didn't you come back sooner?" "Shame," she admitted. "The longer I stayed away, the harder it seemed to return. And then I heard from people you all were moving on, that the farm was thriving, that you had found someone." "Sarah," Robert finished. "My wife for 7 years. Now." "Yes, Sarah," Melissa nodded. "I was happy for you, truly. You deserve happiness, Robert. You always did." The sincerity in her voice surprised him. He had expected to find the same selfish woman who had left on a stormy night. Instead, he was faced with someone who seemed to have wrestled with her own demons. "What exactly do you want?" he asked bluntly. "You can't expect to walk back into their lives as if nothing happened." "I don't," she assured him. "I just want the chance to know them again. To explain even though I know there's no explanation good enough. To ask for forgiveness, even if I might not receive it. And maybe if they allow me, to be part of their lives in some small way." "They're adults now, or nearly so," Robert sighed. "It's up to them to decide if they want to see you. I won't interfere, not to stop them, not to push them." "That's more than I deserve," Melissa said with a sad smile. "Thank you, Robert." "I'm not doing this for you, Melissa," he clarified. "I'm doing it for them, because they're extraordinary people who have the right to know their own story." "You've done an amazing job, Robert." Genuine admiration colored her voice. "I saw what you've built, the farm, the business. It's impressive. We built it together as a family," he corrected. "Each of them contributed, even when they were little, and Sarah, of course." The mention of Sarah's role made Melissa look away. "She seems like a good woman. The boys spoke well of her." "She's the best person I know," Robert said firmly. "Loves our children as if they were her own." The word "our" didn't escape Melissa, who nodded, accepting the reality. "So how long do you plan to stay?" Robert asked, changing the subject. "A few days at first, maybe longer depending on how things go," she replied. "I'm flexible." "And after? Will you go back to your life in New York?" "Actually, I've been living in Pittsburgh for a few years," she explained. "I teach music at a school. It's not the stardom I dreamed of, but it's rewarding in its own way." The information surprised Robert. The idea of Melissa as a teacher, working with children, seemed at odds with the woman he had known. "People change, Robert," she said, as if reading his thoughts. "You certainly have. So have I." "Yes, people change," he agreed. "The question is whether it's enough." When he returned to the farm, Robert found his children waiting anxiously for news. He told them about his conversation with Melissa, staying as neutral as possible, letting them form their own impressions. "So what do we do now?" asked Nathan, who hadn't yet voiced his opinion about his mother's return. "Each of you decides for yourselves," Robert replied. "If you want to see her, you have my support. If you don't, you have that too." Into the days that followed, an unofficial schedule took shape. Olivia was the first to visit Melissa, bringing with her a photo album from the past 15 years. She returned emotionally drained, but with a strange sense of peace. "She really cares," she told the family, "and she's genuinely remorseful." Nathan decided to go the next day, more reserved, with few expectations. His visit was shorter, but equally meaningful. She explained to me about the depression she had after Ethan was born, he shared, how she felt trapped, suffocated. It doesn't justify what she did, but it helps me understand. Emily, always cautious, waited a few days before visiting her mother again. Their conversation was the longest and most intense, covering both the past and future possibilities. She apologized for putting so much responsibility on my shoulders when I was just a child, Emily said, holding back tears. She told me she always knew I'd be strong, but that I should never have been forced to be so strong so young. Ethan, with no memories of his birth mother, found himself in a unique position. For him, the meeting was almost like meeting a distant relative, someone connected by blood but not by shared experiences. "It's strange," he admitted afterward. "She only knows me as the baby she left behind, and I don't know her at all." Jake, true to his initial decision, refused to see Melissa. His anger, fueled by years of unanswered questions, ran too deep to be easily overcome. "I'm not ready," he declared when pressed by Olivia. "Maybe I never will be." Robert respected each child's decision, offering support without judgment. Sarah, with her natural wisdom, became a safe harbor for everyone, listening to their doubts and conflicts without imposing her own opinions. After a week of individual meetings, the idea of a family dinner emerged. Olivia, ever the peacemaker of the group, was the one to suggest it. "We could invite her to the farm," she proposed over breakfast. "It doesn't have to be formal. Just to talk all together." The suggestion was met with mixed reactions. Emily and Nathan were receptive. Ethan seemed curious. Jake immediately objected. "If she comes, don't count on me," he stated, getting up from the table. "Jake, wait," Robert called, but his son had already left. "He needs time," Sarah said gently. "His wound runs deeper." "We shouldn't force this," Robert decided. "Maybe it's too soon for a family gathering." But Olivia, as determined as ever, didn't give up easily. "What if it were on neutral ground?" she suggested later. "In town, at a restaurant. Jake wouldn't have to go if he didn't want to." The idea gradually gained support. Robert, after consulting Sarah, who encouraged the initiative as part of the family's healing process, reluctantly agreed. "But not here at the farm. Not yet," he stipulated, "and no one is obligated to participate." The dinner was scheduled for the following Saturday at the small Italian restaurant in town the family frequented for special occasions. Melissa, notified by Olivia, accepted the invitation with a mix of nervousness and gratitude. When the day arrived, the atmosphere at Oak Ridge Farm was one of tense anticipation. Emily spent hours choosing what to wear, as if her appearance could serve as armor. Nathan and Olivia debated which topics would be safe to discuss. Ethan, more relaxed than his siblings, observed everything with a certain emotional distance. Jake stayed in his workshop all day, working furiously on a new project, channeling his emotions through wood as he always did. As the others prepared to leave, he finally entered the house. "I've decided to go," he announced, surprising everyone. "Not for her, for you." The announcement stirred emotions. Emily hugged her brother, understanding the effort his decision represented. "Are you sure?" Robert asked, concerned. "No," admitted Jake with a tense smile. "But I'm going anyway." Sarah, who had decided not to attend to give the family space, hugged her stepson with pride. "You're stronger than you think," she whispered in his ear. The restaurant Little Italy was small and cozy, with only 10 tables in a space lit by soft lights. Melissa was already there when the family arrived, nervously adjusting the napkin on the reserved table. Seeing everyone walk in together, including Jake, her expression revealed surprise and emotion. She stood up, unsure how to greet them, finally settling on a timid smile and a wave. "Thank you for coming," she said once everyone was seated. "It means a lot to me." The start was awkward, with forced conversations about the weather, the town, and other safe trivialities. Robert, seated at the head of the table, remained silent and watchful, observing every interaction with protective attention. Gradually, as food was served and wine smoothed the edges, the conversation became more natural. Olivia, always talkative, shared stories from her childhood on the farm, mischievous moments and discoveries. "Remember when Nathan and I decided to make a secret garden behind the barn?" she asked, laughing. "Turns out those pretty plants were stinging nettles." The story drew laughter around the table. Even Jake smiled faintly, lost in the shared memories. "You two were always curious," Melissa chimed in timidly. "I remember even as babies, you wanted to touch everything, explore every corner." A brief silence followed the mention of her memories. It was strange hearing Melissa speak of a time when she had been present in their lives, a period that felt like it belonged to another reality. "How is your life in Pittsburgh?" Emily asked, deliberately shifting the focus. Melissa spoke about her work as a music teacher, her small apartment, the simple routine she had built. There was no glamour in her story, no sign of the grand ambitions that had once driven her away. "I mostly teach children," she explained. "It's rewarding to see how music can change lives." "Ironic," Jake remarked, speaking for the first time. All heads turned toward him. "You abandon your own kids and then dedicate your life to strangers." The harshness of his words hung over the table like a dark cloud. Melissa paled but didn't look away. "You're right, Jake," she replied, her voice trembling. "It is ironic and painful. Every child I teach reminds me of what I lost, what I threw away." The raw honesty of her answer seemed to disarm Jake momentarily. He frowned, clearly not expecting such an admission. "Why come back now?" he pressed. "After all this time?" "Because I realized regret without action is useless," she said. "I spent years mourning my choices without doing anything about them. Until..." She hesitated. "Until what?" Jake pushed. "Until I faced my own mortality," she finished. "I had a health scare last year. Nothing serious in the end, but it made me realize I could die without ever trying to fix the damage I caused." The mention of her health caught everyone's attention. Even Robert, who had kept his distance emotionally, looked at her with a flicker of concern. "What kind of scare?" Nathan asked. "They found a lump during a routine checkup," Melissa explained. "I spent weeks waiting for the biopsy, imagining the worst. In the end, it was benign, but those weeks of uncertainty changed my perspective." Ethan, the only one without memories of abandonment to color his judgment, asked the question lingering in the air. "What do you hope to accomplish by coming back? What's your goal?" Melissa took a moment before answering, choosing her words carefully. "I didn't come expecting forgiveness or to make up for lost time," she began. "That would be presumptuous of me. I came so you'd know how deeply I regret what I did, that I think of you all every day, and that I'm here if you'd like to know me. Nothing more, nothing less." The answer was simple, free of drama or manipulation. There was a maturity to it that contrasted with the image of the impulsive young woman who had abandoned her family. "And then?" Emily asked. "You'll go back to Pittsburgh and disappear for another 15 years? "No," Melissa shook her head. "I'd like to stay in touch, if you'll allow it. Visit occasionally, perhaps. Get to know the adults you've become." The conversation continued, shifting between moments of tension and lighter exchanges. When dessert was served, Jake, who had kept a protective guard up all evening, finally asked the hardest question. "Did you think about us?" His voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. "All those years, did you really miss us, or was it just guilt?" The room seemed to freeze. Robert, who had rarely intervened, watched Melissa intently, equally interested in her answer. "I thought of you every day," she replied, eyes glistening. "I held on to every detail I could remember. The way Emily would furrow her brow when she concentrated. How you, Jake, would build things out of whatever was around. The twins. Laughter when they played together. How Ethan would only calm down to certain lullabies." She paused, taking a breath. "I celebrated your birthdays in silence. I imagined how you were growing, what you were learning. The guilt was there, yes, constant and corrosive. But it wasn't just guilt. It was love, too, even if it was a love I didn't know how to express or honor." Her words hung in the air, too sincere to dismiss easily, yet still not enough to erase 15 years of absence. Jake stood abruptly. "I need air," he said, heading for the door. "Jake," Melissa called, but Robert gestured for her to let him go. "Give him space," he advised. "He's always needed to process things in his own way." The dinner ended soon after. in an uneasy truce. There was no full reconciliation, but neither was there the outright rejection many had feared. As they said goodbye in the parking lot, Melissa avoided physical gestures, respecting the still blurred boundaries. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said simply. "It meant more than I can say." On the drive back to the farm, the car was quiet, each family member lost in thought. Jake had chosen to walk back, needing the time alone to clear his mind. "What did you think?" Robert finally asked. "She's changed," Emily observed. "Not the impulsive person I remember." "She seems sincere," Nathan added. "About the regret, about wanting to know us. Do you think we should give her a chance?" Olivia asked, always seeking family consensus. "This isn't a decision we can make as a group," Robert replied wisely. "Everyone has their own history with her, their own feelings to sort through." When they arrived at the farm, Sarah was waiting eagerly for news. She listened carefully as they recounted the dinner, offering support without judgment. "Sounds like an important first step," she remarked, "for all of you." Jake arrived nearly an hour later, tired from the long walk but calmer. He found Robert alone on the porch sipping coffee under the stars. "I hate her for leaving us," Jake said, sitting beside his father, "but I also understand why she did. Can you feel both things at once?" "It's more than possible," Robert answered. "It's human." In the days that followed, each family member processed the encounter in their own way. Melissa, respecting the space they needed, didn't reach out immediately, waiting for them to take the next step if they chose. To us, it was Olivia who first reached out, inviting her mother to visit the organic products lab she managed with Nathan. Melissa accepted gratefully, amazed by the knowledge and passion her children showed for their work. Nathan, though more reserved, joined them, explaining the sustainable processes they had implemented on the farm. His approach was technical, keeping an emotional distance but still including Melissa in the conversation. Emily chose a different path, inviting Melissa for coffee in town. Their talk was more personal, covering not just the past but also their current lives, interests and dreams. "You would have made a great businesswoman," Melissa remarked, impressed by how Emily ran the family business. "I learned responsibility early," Emily replied without bitterness, simply stating a fact. "I know," Melissa nodded sadly. "And I'm sorry for that. You lost part of your childhood because of me." "I also gained things," Emily reflected. "I learned resilience, how to face challenges. I'm not saying it was easy or fair, but it made me who I am today." Ethan, curious about the mother he'd never known, spent more time with Melissa, asking questions and filling in gaps. For him, it was almost like discovering a missing part of himself. Jake kept his distance, but Robert noticed he quietly asked his siblings about their meetings with Melissa. His curiosity, and perhaps his need for closure, fought against deeply rooted resentment. Robert and Sarah watched everything carefully, offering support when needed, but letting each find their own path in this fragmented reconciliation. Melissa, who had initially planned to stay only a few days, extended her visit, settling into a small rented house in town. She found temporary work, teaching music at the local school, gradually integrating into the community. "I didn't expect to stay this long," she admitted to Robert during a chance meeting in the town square. "But I can't leave now." "It's your choice," he replied, still keeping an emotional distance. "But be clear about your intentions. They're opening up, becoming vulnerable again. Don't hurt them a second time." "I won't," she promised. "I'm here for as long as it takes, however long that is." Melissa's prolonged stay in town sparked speculation. The story of the mother who had abandoned her family during a crisis and returned 15 years later spread quickly. Some were critical, judging her harshly. Others, more compassionate, saw her attempt at reconnection as an act of courage. Sarah, ever sensible, helped the family navigate these turbulent waters. "What matters is how you feel, not others' opinions," she reminded them during a family dinner. "This is a healing journey that belongs only to you." As months passed, a new kind of relationship began to form. It wasn't the traditional mother-child bond, long lost, but something different, built on honesty and realistic expectations. Melissa didn't try to assume a maternal role. Instead, She approached them as a relative who genuinely wanted to know them, learn about their lives, and offer support when asked. It was during one of Melissa's visits to town to meet Olivia that something unexpected happened. A well-dressed, authoritative-looking middle-aged man approached them at the cafe. "Melissa Carter?" he asked, surprising her with the use of her maiden name. "Yes," she replied, confused. "Do we know each other?" "Richard Morgan, attorney," he introduced himself, representing Gregory Adams. The name meant nothing to Olivia, but she noticed how her mother paled. "How did you find me?" Melissa asked, suddenly tense. "Mr. Adams has considerable resources," replied the lawyer. "When he found out you were here, he asked me to deliver this." He held out an envelope, which Melissa took with trembling hands. "What is that?" asked Olivia when the man walked away. "Troubles from the past," Melissa replied vaguely, tucking the envelope into her purse. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Olivia, always intuitive, sensed something serious was happening. When she told the family about the incident, their concern was immediate. "Who is Gregory Adams?" Robert asked Emily, who had stayed in closer contact with Melissa. "She never mentioned that name," Emily replied, worried. But it seemed like a serious matter. The answer came from an unexpected source. Jake, who had secretly researched his mother's whereabouts during her years away, recognized the name. "Gregory Adams is a music producer from New York," he explained, surprising everyone with his knowledge. "He worked with Mom when she was trying to make it as a singer. There were rumors about a relationship between them." The revelation hit like a bombshell. The idea that Melissa might have left the family, not just for personal ambitions, but also for another man, added a new layer of complexity and potential heartbreak. "How do you know this?" Robert asked, shocked. "I always tried to find her," admitted Jake, avoiding eye contact. "Not always for the right reasons. At first, it was anger. I wanted to confront her. Later, just curiosity. I found some articles about small gigs, mentions on music blogs. His name came up often." Robert absorbed the information in silence. There was a part of the story Melissa hadn't shared, and he wondered what other secrets she might still be keeping. End of story. Dear listener, if this journey of redemption and forgiveness has touched your heart, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do in Robert's or the children's place? Your subscription to our channel helps us keep bringing stories that move you and make you reflect on the bonds that unite us. Thank you for being with us.